Monday, September 9th, 2019. I want to introduce our new Assistant City Clerk, Jennifer Dobiak, who is sitting in this evening. We have a couple presentations and staff reports. We will begin with short-term rentals. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mayor, if I may, I'd like to ask Jordan Elena, the Development Manager, to come up. He's going to give a presentation to the Council about the short-term rental requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Council. Jordan Elena, Development Manager. Tonight I will give you a brief overview of the city's current short-term rental, or STR, regulations and their application and approval processes. As a refresher, I have to remember to do this, sorry. As a refresher, staff began to review the issue of short-term rentals in the summer of 2017. You received a study session presentation on the topic in March of last year, and following that presentation, staff met with the Hotel Motel Alliance, as well as local bed and breakfast operators to get their input on the issue. Staff took input from the City Council and industry groups to develop a UDO amendment, which you approved in November of last year. Sorry.
Yeah, he's soft.
I can't hear you very well. It's not going to record or go across the airways.
Speak up, Jordan.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. So that UDO amendment was approved in November of 2018, and that amendment is outlined in more detail in this presentation. So in that UDO amendment, the following definition for a short-term rental was outlined. Short-term rentals are only allowed in single or two-family dwelling units. STRs may be managed by the property owner or management company. They are limited to a maximum of 4 guest rooms and a total of 10 guests per stay. No more than 2 adults are allowed per bedroom. No meals may be provided to guests. Units may not be rented to separate parties at the same time. And a single stay can last no longer than 30 consecutive days. Continuing with other existing regulations, each short-term rental is required to obtain a business license, and that business license number must be posted on all advertisements for the rental. Short-term rentals are subject to the hotel, motel, and other lodging regulations as outlined in Article 3 of Chapter 5 of the City Code. This section requires the collection of the transient guest tax, the maintenance of a guest register, and limits the frequency of rentals, among other things. These provisions in this article pertain to all lodging establishments as well as short-term rentals. Our code requires 1 off-street parking space be provided for each room offered for rent. However, a credit of 1 space may be given for every 18 feet of street frontage for the property. So we require at least 1 off-street parking provided for each rental, and the rest could be made up for with off-street parking, depending on the site and the location and all of that kind of good stuff. Code also requires that a short-term rental operator secure a trash service from a licensed trash hauler in the city. Life safety regulations are an important aspect of short-term rentals. Each short-term rental in the city is required to provide these basic life safety items. A map showing an escape route for the rooms, carbon monoxide and smoke detectors, child-proof outlets, fire extinguishers at the appropriate locations, and emergency contact information on site in a central location. Each rental is inspected for these items by the fire department prior to consideration by the Planning Commission. Additionally, inspections are also performed through the business licensing process, and those inspections look at very similar life safety elements. Now that I've outlined the basic short-term rental regulations, let's look at what is required as part of each application that goes in front of the Planning Commission. The applicant must provide basic information about their short-term rental, including their name, the business name, their phone number and email address for the file, the number of bedrooms they will be utilized, and the total occupancy that they will allow. The applicant must also submit a letter with their application that outlines how their business is to operate. This letter requires answers to questions related to how the operator intends to manage the business, including items like how they will meet the parking requirements and their trash service information. Based on feedback from the Planning Commission and the public during the first several short-term rental cases, staff has asked each applicant to specifically address these 3 additional questions in their letter. The applicant's letter is included as part of the completed application that is submitted to the Planning Commission in their packet and is used as part of their review. Prior to the public hearing and Planning Commission decision, each short-term rental application is reviewed by various departments to ensure conformance with city code. If any issues are noted during the review, the applicant is notified and has the opportunity to correct or make changes to the application in advance of the Planning Commission meeting. In some cases, the issue may be in direct conflict with city code or otherwise unsolvable, and the application would be disqualified at that point. The UDO also requires public notice for neighboring property owners prior to the public hearing and action by the Planning Commission. Public notice includes letters sent to all property owners with 185 feet of the proposed short-term rental and the posting of a sign at the site for 15 days prior to hearing. As is standard practice, both the letter and signs notify neighbors of the time and date of the public hearing. Following the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall approve with conditions, or deny each application based on their evaluation of the application and the testimony heard at the hearing. Under most circumstances, the Planning Commission is the final decision maker for short-term rentals. However, the applicant may appeal a decision of the Planning Commission to the City Council within 5 days. In the case of a valid legal protest, the final decision is also made by City Council, and the Planning Commission's decision is considered a recommendation only. The UDO outlines the following criteria by which the Planning Commission should evaluate each application. They include whether the short-term rental would create excessive noise, pedestrian or vehicular traffic, or any other condition that would interfere with the safety and general welfare of the surrounding neighborhood. If a short-term rental application is approved, the owner must then apply for a business license. The business license application is reviewed by the relevant departments for compliance with city code. And that at that time, the premises is also inspected by the fire department. And then again, annually, as the short-term rental business license is up for renewal, it is again inspected before the license is renewed. And finally, to safeguard neighborhoods, the city has the ability to hold a business license administrative hearing if a short-term rental is found to be in violation of any city ordinance or has multiple complaints filed against it. Following a hearing, the business license could be suspended or revoked accordingly. And with that, that concludes my brief presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Jordan. So this is something that, you know, is a local conversation, a state conversation, a national, probably international conversation, which caused us to develop these UDO regulations in anticipation or in realization that this industry is happening in our city, and how are we going to regulate it within what the state of Missouri will allow for regulation. So a couple of things, and correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that we have been able to work with the industry to make sure that we are collecting the transient guest tax on these short-term rentals, just as we do with our bed and breakfasts and hotel, other lodging establishments. Is that right?
That's correct. I believe in the last month or so, you passed an ordinance that collected specifically, I think, from Airbnb, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. I mean, that was a big concern, I know, from our lodging industry partners, is how, you know, that was seen as maybe a loophole for short-term rentals, that they weren't subject to that same additional tax that that hotels, motels, and bed and breakfasts were. So we're seeing, and I know a couple of members of the Planning Commission are here, we're starting to see more and more of these applications coming forward for short-term rentals, and they must meet all of these requirements that you have outlined this evening in order to be considered for approval and moved on to the City Council. So what is, I mean, I know that the Planning Commission is seeking and the staff is seeking some additional direction from the council about how to treat these applications. So what are some of the, if you could just help to enlighten us and the public about what are the things that are coming forward that maybe we haven't adequately addressed?
Okay, yeah, just briefly, a few of the sort of concerns I think that I would characterize that were raised at Planning Commission was the idea of non-local owners and how to deal with owners if they didn't live in Independence or in the metro or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. Another concern was whether or not there was a need for additional inspections, whether those are health inspections like a hotel would get, or okay, whether those are rental ready type inspections. Okay. Another concern raised was regarding the historic district and whether there needs to be any special consideration for the historic district, whether there should be limits or whether it should be allowed at all. And the last one was just sort of a general question about the number in a neighborhood or a cap overall for the city.
Okay. Rental ready. The root of rental ready is treating landlords as businesses. I mean, that's the underlying basic, premise of rental ready. So we now treat landlords similar to a commercial business, recognizing that that is a business. And this is a business as well, whether you live on the premises, you don't live on the premises. That is a business that requires a business license. The historic district, and I guess I define that by a certain, there's a historic district boundary, but it contains a particular census block, which is currently 61% rental. Or the latest information that I have on that census block is that it's not predominantly owner occupied within that district. So I guess what I struggle with is how is a long-term rental differentiated from a short-term rental? And how can we prohibit a business from operating within a particular district?
Yeah, and just to add to that, we also did research into what other municipalities are doing, and we looked at other very historic cities, including Charleston, South Carolina, and New Orleans, and found that basically no city provides special.
Right, because visitors want to live.
Exactly.
Want to visit the historic
most cities
district.
view that as a boon to their historic district to bring travelers in to stay there close to historic attractions. So just our research hasn't shown a lot of support for that in other communities.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes.
Yeah, just a couple. Do you have any idea, first of all, how many we have now in Independence?
Ooh. That would be a very tough guess. We probably have hundreds. It's
Hundreds?
Just hard to tell, and we can only go off of what public information is out there. We currently have 9 applications that are pending in front of the Planning Commission.
They're operating all over Independence. I come across people on a regular basis who say, I'm just renting this for a few days, here for a conference, and we haven't really had this process to identify them and ensure that they have a business license and are paying their transient guest tax. So that's why we're starting to see these applications come forward as we require these people to be identified, just as we did with landlords when we implemented rental ready.
So a couple questions.
We
First,
have three legal ones, I guess,
I believe 2, yes.
or 2 legal ones.
3 legal ones.
2 and 1.
2 in residential, I think, and 1 in a commercial area.
Yeah.
Okay. On the page with existing regulations, the last line, I'm not sure what that means. And it says, short-term rentals shall not be rented more than twice in 24-hour period. Is that part of the regulations for hotels and motels now? Is it?
Yes, I believe it is. Yeah, that basically prevents someone from coming in, for an hour in the middle of the day. It, makes sure someone's checking out and checking in and staying
Okay.
for a
Well,
period
twice
of time.
in 24 hours seems like a lot. The second question is on the existing regulations page with the life safety. So you have listed there carbon monoxide, child-proof outlets, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, but shouldn't we add no smoking or vaping in the house? I mean, if they smoke or vape, it's going to set off the smoke detectors. But the real concern goes back to what the fire department and the fire chief has said before, which is that most fires that take lives happen where people sleep. And this is where people sleep. So it seems to me, and of course it's going to be up to the owner, but obviously if there's smoke detectors in the house, they're going to set off the smoke detectors or they're going to disable them. So it would make sense to me to say that there's no smoking allowed. We don't want to have a problem. We don't want to have a fire. We don't want to have a fatality. So it seems to me that might be something that we might want to consider. The 2 other concerns, 2 other things I wanted to mention. One of them has to do with the number in a particular neighborhood, and I think maybe we ought to look at that down the road. It doesn't have to be in this. This is a great document. But down the road, I think, there could be an overabundance in some neighborhoods, and then it really starts to affect property values, other people that live there. And so I think at some point we need to look at limiting the number in a particular neighborhood. I've had the past 2 years a HOA summit, which we've never had in Independence. And last year we identified over 40 homeowner associations in Independence, and I think there were probably 15 or 20 that came to that last year's meeting. And I mentioned this particular item to them, that it would make sense for those HOAs in their articles of association to have something in there to limit short-term rentals in those neighborhoods. And they can do things that the city can't do, but I think this information needs to go out to those HOAs. They need to have this information, maybe even use it in their articles of association, and they can choose to do that without any city input or interference, but this is great information, and I'd like that to go out to the HOAs. So John Mayfield has the contact information for all of those.
Yeah, I can
He's
work
the
with
one
John
that's-
to make sure we get some
so I
of
would
this packaged
appreciate
and
you
out to
getting
them.
that to the HOAs and just let them know that the city is now structuring regulations, and they may want to do that in their own neighborhoods. So that's enough. Thank you.
Yes.
I noticed, Jordan, that one of the existing regulations is no more than 30 consecutive days per stay. That's like if I want to rent it, I can stay only 30 days, but then Jen could go in and run it for the next 30 days, and then the mayor can do it the next 30 days. And so I could have a short-term rental that is really rental property, and I'm treating it as a commercial business in the middle of the Truman District, right?
Yes.
I mean, I guess technically that way, but
So
the only
here's my
thing I would
question.
say is that,
At what point does a residential property become a commercial property where we now have spot zoning? Maybe not by zoning, but by right. And I think we have to be very cautious of that. I attended the Planning Commission hearing, and the neighborhood, I think it was the third one in 3 weeks that neighborhood was facing, and there was another one coming up at the next Planning Commission meeting. And one of the neighbors said to me, at what point is this too much? And I don't know of any way we can limit the number. Is there? Do other cities limit the number?
We've found very, very few cities, I would say somewhere on the order of 98% of them do not regulate, and those that do have various ways of calculating it. For instance, we don't allow short-term rentals in multifamily units, so in
Why?
apartment buildings.
Why?
I think just for ease of, defining what a short-term rental is going to be here in Independence and regulating it, because it would,
But if I have a fourplex, why can't I rent one of my four?
It was
I mean, is there a
easier.
reason? Is there a scientific reason we don't do it? Or we just arbitrarily said single and duplexes only?
Tom Scannell will answer that.
Come on up, Tom.
It's what the council approved.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of background as far as why we drafted the ordinance the way that we did. There's cities handle these a variety of different ways. They allow individual rooms to be rented out. They allow multi-family units to be rented out. In working with both our health department, our building official, and our fire department, different rules kick in when certain things happen. Once you start having short-term rentals in multi-family, there's a whole set of codes that kick in that I think kicks it up to the commercial building code versus the residential code. So we limited it to single-family and duplex only. We also limited the number of guests that can stay within a short-term rental. Again, the fire code says that if you have more than 10, it becomes a boarding house, and then that opens up another set of codes that they have to follow. So what we tried to do is to narrowly define this within kind of keeping in mind what all the ordinances say, so that we have less than 10 occupants staying in a house, less than 4 bedrooms can be rented out as part of that house.
Are the short-term rentals different than B&Bs?
Yes. The definition difference is that a bed and breakfast is owner occupied, and they may or may not provide breakfast. In a short-term rental, they are not owner occupied, and they do not and cannot provide breakfast.
Okay, but other than that? I
They're
mean,
very
I would be more
similar, yes.
comfortable if a B&B was in my neighborhood, because at least I know those people live there all the time. I'm familiar with those people and they're there, versus a short-term Airbnb rental where the owner lives perhaps in another state and just simply rents it out.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have health inspections for Airbnbs, right?
Correct.
Do we have health inspections for bed and breakfasts?
If there are over 5 rooms being rented out.
So do we have B&Bs right now that have more than 5 rooms and they are inspected by the health department?
I'm not sure of how many that we have that are over 5, but I can think of at least one.
And we don't inspect Airbnbs? And we don't do short-term rental inspections either, right?
Correct.
What inspections does the city do other than collect the money for the license?
So the fire department performs the inspection before the application goes to the planning commission. The fire department goes back out as part of the business license review and inspects the property, and then thereafter each year as part of their annual inspections.
So that's it?
Yeah.
Does a B&B have to have a food inspection, Tom? If they're serving breakfast,
If they're serving breakfast,
they
yes,
have
do.
to have a food
Yes,
inspection.
correct.
Yeah.
Oh. Any other comments or questions?
Is it going to be really hard to find out if any city limits the number in a neighborhood? Is that something you could search on Google or something like that?
So we've done a search nationwide. Went out to the American Planning Association website, which actually has downloaded most municipalities' regulations, and so just a matter of just calling through those and
I would just be
identifying them.
curious.
And like Jordan said, we found no city that actually put a hard cap on. What Jordan was alluding to. There's like 1 or 2 cities that we found out there where they have some type of restrictions on block face type of restriction. Yeah, it was kind of confusing to us as well.
Okay.
So.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yes?
Short-term rentals are here. They're out there.
Correct.
It's just like the amount of landlords we had that we didn't know about. When we got it on the books to go search for them, we found out there was 3 times the amount and still getting more today.
Correct.
So what we need is something on the books now so we can find out how to regulate. And we need a skeleton, if not precise, because of how it's going to affect. I think, that this is going to be another one of those rental-ready things, and we're going to need some help if we have to add that to our existing person's workload.
Correct. This program is in its infancy. The ordinance was just adopted back in November of last year. This was put together based on city staff working group, which was made up from various city departments. And as we see things, we can bring changes forward that helps protect the
But they're
neighborhoods.
operating
They're
now,
out there operating, correct.
and we need to get something on the books in order to regulate them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Our next presentation is Prohibition against Possession of Weapons by Minors, Ordinance Changes, and IPD Gun Unit Implementation. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, members of the council, I'm pleased to note that we have with us this evening Sergeant Seth Bosch with the Independence Police Department. I'm going to ask him to come forward here. He's going to make a presentation for you about some possible ordinance changes relating to possession of firearms by minors, and he's also going to talk about some new programs that the department has started to combat firearms violations. So, Sergeant, if you would.
Thank you. My name's Seth Bosch, Sergeant, Detective Unit in Independence here. The past few years, we've seen a huge increase in firearm crimes in Independence. Year to date, we have 175 gun-related crimes to include multiple homicides, aggravated assaults, and robberies. Weapon cases involving juveniles have also increased. Independence for over the past 20 years have been ahead of the game. We utilize the Safe Street program, where we have an ordinance prohibiting juveniles from obtaining firearms or weapons. The one thing to be proud of in our ordinance that I feel is important, and we're still ahead of the game compared to other cities, is that if a parent or guardian allows a minor to possess a firearm, whether it's for hunting or target shooting, is that minor having been first instructed in safe handling of firearms in accordance with standard published by a national recognized firearms certification program. We also have 2 dedicated police officers who are assigned to the school district that are keeping track of juveniles arrested for weapon crimes. They are monitoring their behavior at school with the help of school resource officers to ensure the safety of the students. 3 months ago, IPD added 2 detectives to the detective unit, and a gun squad was established. Currently, the gun squad has 1 sergeant and 4 detectives, and one of the detectives is a member of the ATF task force. In the coming weeks, IPD will also be receiving additional help from the ATF, as they're sending us 2 agents that will be officed out of our unit. Our primary focus has been felons and drug users in possession of firearms and shots fired calls. Multiple times a week, our patrol officers are arresting armed criminals who are also convicted felons. These subjects, along with persons who use illegal substances, are prohibited from possessing firearms. We also investigate straw purchasers. This occurs when one person buys a gun for someone else who is either prohibited by law from possessing a gun or who doesn't want his or her name on the transaction. It's our goal to file each of these cases with the United States Attorney's Office in the Western District of Missouri. Since January, the investigations unit has been assigned 88 felon and user in possession cases. Over 50% of these cases have been charged through the federal system, 10% through the state, and the remainder of these cases are still being investigated or waiting for labs to come back, DNA or fingerprints. This does not count the multiple felon and user in possession cases that have been filed by our drug unit and street crimes units. The gun squad also follows up on shots fired calls. Typically, these cases stem from someone calling 911 to report a drive-by shooting or sounds of shots fired. Patrol officers will go to the scene and find evidence. In these cases, the suspects a lot of times are unknown. Detectives will respond out, conduct an area canvass, and speak with people in the area. If someone's not home, the detectives will leave a door hanger on their door, let them know what we're investigating, and asking them for help and how to contact us to help us. We've been successful in solving these shooting cases, but the success is only accomplished by working together with other units, from patrol officers responding to the initial call to crime scene units collecting and testing the evidence. Since September of 2018 to September of this year, the lab has test fired 519 firearms and processed 227 other items of evidence related to firearm crimes from 548 different crime scenes. This has generated a great number of leads for the investigators to follow up on. Our intelligence unit plays a vital part in these investigations as they analyze the shell casings collecting at crime scenes across the city to trace specific guns that are used more than once. The gun squad then must work backwards to find the gun and the people who use them. The gun squad has been successful in many cases, to include a recent homicide where the firearm was used in 3 other shootings around the metro. Just last week, the gun squad linked a carjacking where a victim had been shot in a neighboring jurisdiction to an aggravated assault in our city. A criminal complaint has been filed with the federal prosecutor's office on that case. The gun squad, in partnership with the ATF, will focus on tracking illegal guns, and it will be the most comprehensive program we have implemented to attack gun violence and independence to date. What will help us the most is what comes from the community and the tips or information they share that will assist in our investigations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant. Would you just repeat for everybody, so we make sure that we understand it, is what the ordinance change, because we've had this on our books for 20 years.
The ordinance change is real minor.
Yes, so could you
It's
just
from the
explain
state statute that says that you can possess a gun if you have a CCW. Well, the statute has changed. You no longer need a CCW, so
Right.
that is being removed from
So
this.
that's concealed carry for all of you who don't know what CCW is. Because Missouri is an open carry state, preemption state. So when I've been following closely this legislation that's been happening in Kansas City, Missouri over the last couple of weeks, and they did not have this type of ordinance on their books, as I understand it. So they did pass 2 different bills through their city council that address this possession by a minor. So in reading and researching that, my understanding is that what the state law says is that a minor cannot possess a gun without, or a firearm without consent from
Parent or guardian.
parent or guardian. What does that consent look like? I mean, going up to a kid and say, "Did your mom say you could have that gun?" And he says, "Oh yeah, my mom told me I could have this gun." I mean, what I'm
If we go contact a parent and they said, yeah, well, we said he could have it. But if he's
Okay.
using it illegally, there could be consequences for the parents as well.
I gotcha. Okay. All right. That's, thank you. I'm not trying to be glib. I just, it is sort of, it's unclear what that is.
Side by side, our ordinance that Kansas City just passed is almost identical.
Yeah.
However, we put in there that you need to go to get safety training first, and I think that's really important.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, I think it's very important that we are absolutely aligned with our neighboring city, so that people don't feel that there's more leniency if they come over to Independence than if they're in Kansas City, or vice versa. So thank you for working on that particular aspect of it. My other question is in regards to when the charges are taken for prosecution. Can you describe to us what that is like and if the courts are accepting these cases?
Recently, we've had really good luck with the Jackson County Family Courts, and they've been taking a lot of cases, especially if they're dealing with a dangerous person. If not, then we fall back to our youth court with our city, and they take up the charge. But we've done really good lately with the Jackson County Family Court with our juveniles.
Okay, very good. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Oh, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Councilman?
Yeah. I just wanted to ask also, it seems like this falls in line with the state law, so there's not a conflict there. The other concern that I have is concerning mental illness. There's quite a number in Independence as well as in the metro area that are on meds off and on. And so when they're not, I'm not sure it is in line with state law at this point, but I think that's something we ought to look at down the road, because it seems like that could potentially offer a much greater risk in many cases than even some of the minors that might possess firearms. So I don't know the state statute. I don't know how that would
So, Councilman,
look.
I asked
So-
John Mayfield to do some research regarding this for me, and we
Good.
didn't research every state. I
Okay.
had a select states that I asked him to research, to look at their ordinances. Every state that I asked him to research has preemption, which means you can't enact local laws that counter or add to or subtract to the state law. Almost every state has concealed carry, which we don't. That's state law. Some of them did have, specific to your point, provisions of if you have been diagnosed with certain mental illnesses, substance abuse, that there's some restrictions. Missouri does not have that. But we cannot enact those locally.
That's at the state level.
And those are covered
State
on,
level.
if you go buy a weapon, you have
Yeah.
to fill out an application. That is a question
It's
on
a question.
that application for the feds
If
to
they,
approve
if they
or not
honor it,
approve.
if they honor the question and answer it honestly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Councilman?
So you have a question and they lie. And now you have something on paper that says they lied. You have a law in place that they broke. And this seems to be proactive too. I mean, you have it there. Just the same as with vaping or with cigarettes or anything else on the books. I think it's wonderful to have. I think, enacting it is a tough job. And you've been doing a great job at it so far. But the rise is equal to the amount of crime that's risen too. So it's not unusual. It's within that scape that's happening. But we have something on the books that allows us, when it does happen, to enforce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Sergeant. Okay, this takes us to our board and commissions report. Madam City Clerk.
There has been a recommendation by a majority of the council interview committee to appoint Grant Watkins Davis to the City Planning Commission. If there are no objections, we will add this to our next regular meeting.
Are there any objections to adding this to the next regular council meeting? Hearing none? Please proceed with putting that on the next agenda. Anything else? There was in your packets a list. Oh, I forgot to do something. Excuse me. Let me see if I brought it down with me. Councilman Perkins was not able to be here this evening, but he did ask me to, in his place, to ask that Sean Brimmer be appointed as his appointment to the Independence Parks Commission. So this is an individual appointment and has asked for that to be added to the next council agenda if there's no objection. Okay, thank you. Any others? Okay, Mr. City Manager, anything else this evening?
Nothing else this evening.
Okay, we are adjourned.